Welcome to the County Line Church of God, where being a Christian makes you a member, and where God calls all of us to grow into the image of His Son, Jesus Christ. The first lesson that we discussed had to do with Jesus' highest calling for our lives in John 17, where He says, "It is my will that you be with me where I am." So hopefully you are in that place. And the second lesson had to do with the first word of the gospel. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Matthew 4:17. And the word repent was metanoia. Totally change your consciousness from no God to God. So hopefully you have done that. Now I'm going to discuss the actual living of the Christian life and issues that can come up. And there's a couple scriptures. One is Hebrews 12:14. Andrew, would you read Hebrews 12:14 and 15?
All right. Hebrews 12:14. Follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. Looking diligently lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled.
I just use that as a reference for the idea that you can become bitter or better when something happens to you, depending on how you respond to it. And also Romans 8:28. That's the all things work together for good, I believe, but Andrew will read it to us.
Yes, Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose.
Read the next verse.
Sorry, I'd already flipped shut the Bible, but I will get over to it here. Verse 29. For whom He did foreknow, He also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren.
So one of the goals we talk about is being conformed to the image of God, or the image of Christ. And this particular verse in Romans 8:28 sort of makes it important on how you respond to the events that happen to you. If you respond them in a way that God would have you respond according to His purposes, whether that event is good or bad in our ordinary sense, it can be used to help transform you into the image of Christ. If you respond to the event as God would have you respond. So those two verses in Hebrews 12 and then Romans 8:28. I have a graphic which I hope you can make a copy of. Okay. But she will show you a graphic that I'm looking at, so you can look at this too. And it's one of the graphics from Susan Mudo's and Dr. Aaron Von Kahn's spiritual maturity class that we have taught and you can take. And at the peak of this little graph, an angle like this, is a crisis. Something that happens to you that you don't like, that you think you don't like. And this graphic shows there's two ways to respond to that. And one is the root of bitterness, and the other is accepting it. One would say the root of bitterness, you reject it, you see it as a danger, and becomes a deformative event in your life, and you feel abandoned by God, and so it's a abandonment that is depreciative. On the other hand, if you respond as whatever this crisis is, as an opportunity to do the will of God, to respond as God would have you respond, then it can become a formative option, and you will be abandoned to God, and it's an appreciative abandonment to God. So that graphic, I think, is a very good one. I often carry this around with me because of that event happening in your life. How do you respond to it? And as it says in Romans 8, no matter what the event is, if you respond as God would have you respond, then you can be transformed into the image of Christ. I think that's a very good lesson here for how do you respond to the things that happen in your life. The little graphic refers to it as transcendent crisis, some event that has great importance to you. And by the way, it doesn't always have to be something that we think is bad. If you followed some of the people that win the lotteries of a lot of money, within a few years they've lost their friends, they've lost their jobs. It's been very destructive. So it's not just bad or good events that happen, but any event, you have to respond to that as God would have you respond. Pat always said if she won the lottery, she'd put the money in the bank and invest it and get financial advice and spiritual advice and not just waste it. So I hope that these thoughts will be beneficial to you. And the bottom part of this graph takes you further. It's called the appraisal process. And it's a little dark here, but as this process goes on, and again, you're trying to let it, whatever event it is, be a formative option in your life, you have to be in awe as to how God can work in your life. And you give attention and abiding to what He's doing. That's part of the appraisal process. You apprehend what He's doing, you appraise what He's doing, you have a appreciative abandonment sense of God being with you, acknowledging that there can be dissonance, that it takes place, but you affirm the formative option, and you always say yes. And this graphic topic is say yes always. I hope these thoughts will be of benefit to you as you endeavor to live the Christian life, keeping in mind that you're going to have ups and downs. But no matter what the event is, whether you think it's good or bad, how are you going to respond to it? It's not the event, but the view you take of it that mostly determines what you make of it. God bless you.
Last year, you had a major event take place when you had a broken arm in January of 2019. Was that a life transformative event for you, the pain from that?
Well, I was at the office. It was one of those really icy days. I got out of the van to walk over to the door, and I thought, well, since Jesus walked on water, surely I could walk on ice. And I'm just kidding, but as I got out of the van, I slipped and fell backwards, the hardest I've ever fallen. Fell backwards and broke my left arm, laying there on the ice. There was a secretary at the door who saw the whole thing, called for emergency vehicles, and a policeman came and a fireman came. They wanted to help me get up off the ice, get me in a chair, and I said, go ahead, but don't touch this arm. Something's bad, you know. And of course I found out it was completely broken all the way across. So I went to the hospital for that. That was not a good, happy event. But Pat can tell you I didn't let it destroy me or make me angry. Is that correct,
Pat? Silence from Mom, but I think laughter maybe. But
Laughing together.
laughing together, she said.
I remember I was in the hospital for like a day and a half, took x-rays, and the doctor came in and said, we're not going to do anything. And I said, why? It's broken. He said, well, your break is right below your joint. The joint's okay. And if we go in there and do some repairs, we could hurt the joint. So they decided just to put it in a sling. So there was a period of time there where Pat had to help me get dressed and everything because it was just too painful.
Even like
Broken arm.
stepping would almost hurt you because it would
Right,
cause
right,
pain on it.
right.
So you had to decide how you approached it.
I did. I
Yes.
did. And having pain is not inconsistent with trying to cope with something.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
You had a real life experience.